Good morning and welcome to this, our latest live interview on Bernie's Facebook page. I'm joined this morning by the Minister of Home Affairs, Walton Brown. Minister, many thanks for joining us and sparing some time this morning.
Happy to be here and good morning.
The election, still fresh in our memories. Were you surprised or did you expect that the PLP would get such a large majority? 24 to 12, that's incredible. A huge swing, wasn't it?
A very significant swing. I had predicted a PLP victory, but certainly not of that magnitude.
What were you predicting, just out of interest?
21 seats. What was most interesting and surprising and encouraging for us is that the PLP won 59% of the popular vote, which is an unprecedented level of support.
I think that was bigger than 98, wasn't it?
Of course, we got 53% in 98, so we got 59% this time. So it means for the first time the PLP has been able to broaden its electoral base of support.
But there was a very large turnout this time, of course, wasn't it?
A large turnout, very significant turnout, and our base of support has now broadened. So I find that very encouraging.
When you say broadened, do you think more white people were voting for it?
I think there are a number of people who would not be identified as traditional PLP supporters who voted for the PLP. So in broadening our mandate, we need to be consistent in our policy delivery, that we address the issues for the people of the country.
So, I mean, you say you broadened your vote, the vote. I mean, was there any particular reason, do you think, the PLP got such a large majority, or was it a culmination of reasons?
Combination. One, there was profound discontent with the nature of the OBA governance. Some policy matters were overly challenging for wide segments of the community, but perhaps more importantly, we presented a platform that was all-encompassing, a platform that spoke to inclusiveness, consultation, and which we will carry through with our mandate as government.
It's going to come on to the manifesto and the platform a bit later on. With such a large majority, a lot of observers think you're probably in for at least 2 terms now. Do you think you would agree with it? You don't want to tempt fate, I know. But,
Well, I never tempt fate, but I think if we are able to deliver on the needs and interests of the people of the country, then we will be the government of Bermuda, endorsed by the people, for some time to come.
We talked about the platform and the manifesto pledge. There were a few things there. Obviously, one of the major issues I want to talk to you about is immigration. The PLP had several 100-day pledges in its manifesto, and one of them was to establish a bipartisan committee on immigration reform, quotes, to ensure fairness in our immigration system while putting Bermudians first. Is this still on the table?
Absolutely, and I lead that initiative, as you will know. I recently announced that the mandate for the Immigration Reform Working Group had been adjusted to identify key principles by which certain decisions could be accomplished. And then following that, we will have a bipartisan committee, bipartisan meaning members of the PLP government as well as members of the official opposition, coming together to look at policy and legislative proposals.
Okay, so I wanted to clarify this because I wasn't quite sure what the time frame would be or how this would work. So is the bipartisan committee going to follow the recommendations of the Immigration Reform Working Group?
Right. The revised mandate for the working group is to identify the key principles under which decisions will be made regarding PRC's discretionary grants of Bermuda status and mixed status families. Those principles will guide the bipartisan committee in its formulation of actual policy and proposed legislation.
So, in terms of actual policy and proposed legislation, what timescale are we looking at?
We will do a fundamental rewrite of the immigration law, which will take at least about a year. That's too long.
That's a year following the recommendations of the Reform Working Group?
No, that's a year from today.
Okay.
Secondly, but perhaps more importantly, 1 year is too long a period of time to wait for everything to be done. And so in the early part of the new year, we will have on the table legislative proposals regarding PRCs and Bermuda status. The wider range of issues involving immigration, because the immigration legislation is a very large bill. It has many, many components to it. People just tend to focus on PRCs and Bermuda status.
There's a lot.
Many other issues, all of which will be looked at in a new piece of legislation. But in the interim, we will do some staggered reforms, including PRCs and status.
Okay, because the Immigration Reform Working Group, that's still ongoing.
Yes.
And you've asked it to report by the end of October.
Yes.
Following which there'll be a 3-month consultation period. Again, if you don't mind, just explain how that's going to fit in with the Bipartisan Committee on Immigration Reform. They'll be working in tandem.
When the working group come up with their principles, the bipartisan committee, including both parties, will consult with the public on the final determination of policy and legislation around PRCs and Bermuda status.
Okay, because there has been some criticism in that respect, saying from your predecessor, Pat Gordon-Pamplin, who was quoted as saying, "Is he, the minister, discounting the numerous town hall meetings and the input by those group members and those who committed to attend has been an exercise in futility." So you seem to be suggesting that there'll be the 3 months consultation period, and then you've just said there'll be more consultation via the bipartisan committee. Isn't it just stretching it all out?
Of course not. I was a part
It looks
of,
like that.
Well,
I know you were part of it. You no longer are, clearly.
well, then let me explain. I was part of that process where we had extensive consultation with the public on some critical issues. I am fully mindful of the content of those consultative meetings, and that's why I know the working group can now come up with the principles, because the principles will be formulated on the back of the extensive consultation. Once that is completed, then we will formulate the actual policy. It's a very clear and logical process for anyone to even imagine that we would discount the tremendous input from wide sectors of the community on this matter. Then they could be accused of being mischievous. I'm interested in getting the right balance of law and policy in place.
But isn't your consultation just going to go back to the same people?
Which,
The committees, the bipartisan committee, you said they'll consult. Isn't that going to go back to the same people?
well, Jeremy, let me explain how the consultative process works. The initial part is to get input from people about what issues are critical, important to them. That has largely taken place. The second stage of consultation is to take back proposals, because you could consult, listen to what people have to say, and then you can determine what's going to be put into place. We could do that quite readily, but inherent in a proper consultative process is to get the input, formulate the proposals, and then take those proposals back. Say, here's what we're thinking about doing, here's what we're likely to do, but we want your input, because something might need to be fine-tuned. So I don't know how anyone could criticize a full and extensive consultative process if the purpose is to get balance and to get issues of concern addressed.
Understood. And you'll understand I'm playing devil's advocate to an extent here.
Well, I understand the role of the media.
I'm sure you do. You were in it once. We're talking about the Facebook group, and I don't know who's behind them, supporting fair immigration reform.
I'm not going to talk about that.
They made some points that need addressing. You can't dismiss them like that.
Well, I dismiss people who work within the cloak of anonymity. If you have issues and you're sincere about your issues, then let's have a conversation. I don't debate. I don't engage in conversations with ghosts. So, yeah, if you're serious, I don't know if it's a group of 1 person or 10 people. I have no idea who's behind it. So I'm not about
if it's 1 person or 1,000 people if they make relevant points.
If they make relevant points, then the points will be addressed in our consultative meetings and so on. I'm not going to answer in this medium any concern raised by an anonymous group. That's like I discount anonymous letters to the editor, and I discount anonymous comments on blogs.
Even if they make relevant points?
On a principle, yes. On a principle.
So when they say they're concerned about yet another consultation period, you won't answer their concerns?
Well, I've just explained what the consultation period involves. I think it's very clear, and I think it's very comprehensive.
You mentioned legislation. I'm sorry, I didn't quite hear when you expected to get legislation. Are we likely to see anything in the throne speech?
Yes.
Can you outline roughly what?
It's 2 weeks. You can make 2 weeks for the throne speech, and you're here.
I want to know now, Minister.
Well, then there'll be no need
I'm
for
impatient.
There'll be no need for a throne speech.
Can you give a headline as to what it might be about
Yeah,
in terms of immigration?
This government will continue to consult and proposes to have legislation regarding PRCs and Bermuda status in the next legislative year.
Has the bipartisan committee been set up yet?
I've contemplated setting it up now, but I think we should wait for the formal the formal swearing in of the new MPs, because they're not technically MPs yet. So once they become formal MPs, then I can swear them. I can set up that committee. But I have names in mind of people who I'd like to have on that committee from the PLP and OBA.
How many people will be on it?
At least five. At least five, and their task will be to take policy proposals and suggestions back to the public.
Will you be chairing it?
I will be a part of that committee. I suspect the minister would likely chair, but I'm flexible. I haven't thought it through that clearly yet.
Now, one of the things you've asked for as well is more statistics, sound statistics, and you're going to do a survey to do that. Has that taken place yet? Can you just explain what sound statistics you want and why you use the phrase sound?
Right. The request for data has come from the Immigration Reform Working Group, and that question, well, those questions are best answered by the chairman, Mr. Medeiros. But that is a...
But you said it as well, so...
I said it as well?
I'm quoting a statement. Apparently you made a statement supporting or suggesting that there's going to be a survey to obtain sound statistics.
Okay. And that survey is coming out of the Immigration Working Group. They want to have certain data regarding mixed status families. So they have actually created an instrument, and they're in the process of collecting data.
On what?
On the nature and extent of mixed status families in Bermuda, i.e. families in which one person has, say, Bermuda status and other people have either PRC or nothing at all. Just trying to get some idea of how extensive that is. The best law,
go ahead, sorry.
The best policy is always based on sound information. You don't create policy or legislation just because you have an idea. You do it based on data and research.
But does it matter if it's one person or 1,000 people who are affected?
Of course it does.
Why?
Because there is no way in this country that this government will award, let's say, for example, 1,000 Bermuda status grants in 1 year. There's just no way that will happen. It just won't. So numbers do matter.
But in terms of legislation, it doesn't matter if it's 1,000 or one person, does it?
What do you mean?
Well, if you're looking at mixed status couples and you're forming policy around those, does it matter if it's one person or 1,000 people? How would that affect policy of whether they should be entitled to X, Y, or Z?
Right. As I said, this is an initiative that came out of the Immigration Work Group. They're the ones who are keen to have it, and I was part of that group.
You were on that group presumably when that happened.
So I supported it when it happened,
so
and as minister I continue to support it, but I'm not going to speak for the working group. They're an independent group that will give a set of conclusions and principles to me, so they can speak for themselves, and they have been doing so for months.
Yeah, I'm aware of that. Yeah. Okay. There's one other 100. So just to go back then, will the bipartisan committee be set up within the 100 days?
It will be set up in September.
Okay, after the House is coming. There's one other 100-day pledge, and I'll read. Reverse the OBA's immigration policy, which removed the requirement that businesses who bring in overseas entertainers must also employ a Bermudian group at the venue at the same time. Is this in motion?
Yep. In fact, I met with the Entertainers Union. Time is a little blurry now, but I've only been here since July 20th, so I met with the Entertainers Union within the last month, I think maybe 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago. And we've agreed on the broad principles. We're just fine-tuning the actual wording. But that policy will be out as soon as the wording is agreed to, but certainly by September it'll be out and operational.
Why was it deemed to be so important to be included in the 100-day pledge?
Because we wanted to identify matters that could be readily adopted, readily implemented, and because oftentimes the public see political parties making all kinds of pledges and commitments during an election cycle, and then once the election's done, it drops off the radar. So we identified some of those campaign commitments and identified those which could be done readily. This is one of them. It's policy, it's not law.
Oh, understood. Yeah. Can you explain why you've done it and why it's, what difference it will make?
It makes a big difference to ensuring that Bermudian entertainers are considered a matter of priority when it comes to working in their own country. It was a very sensitive issue. The previous PLP government had that policy in place. The OBA reversed it. We're setting it back.
So we carry on about the manifesto. There's one part there, and I've taken it slightly out of context, but I think it's okay.
So you've deliberately taken it out of context, and then you can ask me a question about it.
If you want me to read the whole thing, I'll put it in context. I've got it written down, but I'm just aware that it takes a long time to read, and we're limited for time.
Oh, go ahead. No, but that was your start. But go ahead, I'm fine.
Well, I'm admitting it is taking out of context,
Okay.
and I think it's okay. But if I'll read the whole thing now, that's absolutely fine.
Just give me the,
No, I'm
give me
going to
the
read the
question.
whole thing. I'm not going to be accused of taking it out of context.
Those are your words.
I admitted it. Complete, comprehensive, bipartisan immigration reform to ensure that the rights of Bermudians are advanced and protected while recognising the need to grow our economy with a fair and balanced work permits and residential policies. Now, this is the part I was going to take out of context. Our reform will ensure that Bermudians will come first, employer abuse is minimised, and the land in Bermuda is protected for Bermudians. Okay, now, from my point of view, that's a great soundbite. How's it going to work in practice?
Which part do you want to deal with first?
Our
We can
reform
take
will
it-
ensure that Bermudians will come first. How are you going to ensure that Bermudians will come first? How in practice will you make that happen?
Right. So when we see ads that are contrived to deny Bermudians opportunities, those ads will be more, they'll be scrutinized and in some cases just rejected any work permit application where you see a contrived ad. That's one. When you see employment practices which offer prospective employees exceedingly low wages, only because they know it will attract a desperate prospective employee from a poor country, that denies Bermudians opportunities. Those kinds of practices will come to an end. When you see companies abusing the gratuity system, using gratuities in the hospitality sector to benefit management as opposed to it going fully to the employees, which is by right it should do, that represents abuse and it diminishes opportunities for workers and Bermudians. When you have a whole series of practices that allow for cheap, highly exploitable labor to come in, that reduces opportunities for Bermudians. We will stop that. We will minimize it to the extent possible.
Are you going to put this in a policy framework and distribute it to employers?
There
Have
are-
you consulted with employers about this?
We will consult. As I said, all of our main policies will be rooted in consultation. So we have broad objectives based on our election platform, but equally inherent in everything will be consultation.
And have you started those consultations,
course.
or have you got a timeline for them?
It's ongoing.
It's ongoing.
Yesterday, I've already met with the key trade unions. I met with the Employers' Council. I have meetings coming up with other industry representatives. And for any major decision, we will consult.
And from the consultation you've done so far, what kind of feedback does it have? Has it been supportive or not?
Well, we haven't gotten to the nitty-gritty of these issues. Some of that will come later. Some things have been immediate. So there is one matter which didn't require consultation that's going to be announced, I don't know, today or tomorrow, involving a security matter and work permit policy. That was done, and so industry will be informed of it because it's a very minor change, but an important change.
Can you?
No, I can't tell you because the final wording has to be approved, but the decision has already been made. But as I said, for all major policy stuff, we will consult. So we've had preliminary meetings with people, get to know you, and an understanding that we will continue to engage in dialogue for all the issues.
You want to adopt policies inclusive of random checks to ensure that employers of vulnerable work permit holders are acting within the law and adhere to policy.
Yes.
Can you give us an example
Yes.
of what you mean and how this will be enforced?
Yes. A nanny working for a family living in absolutely horrible living conditions, without possession of her passport, and none of her deductions are being properly paid. So that represents abuse, and this government is not going to allow for that kind of abuse. Or where an employer has provided accommodation for someone at a rate that's above market rates, just comes out of his or her pay, and tells the employee they cannot move to another place or they'll be fired. So those conditions are primarily related to work permit holders. And when you continue to allow for the abuse of work permit holders, it lowers the working conditions for all workers. They need to be addressed.
In In practical terms, how will that happen? I mean, you're going to wait for somebody to tip you off, somebody to come with a complaint, or will you actually go out and try and be more proactive in finding these conditions?
That's what we just said, random checks. So we will do spot checks.
Well, I'm trying to expand on that. Yeah.
Right. So we will send people to go and assess. So what you do in sort of research is you do, randomness is the key to understanding situations. So you do random checks, and those random checks will identify the nature and extent of any potential abuse. So we do random checks, and if a certain area is seen to be particularly vulnerable to such activities, then you look more fully at that particular area.
Which comes on to the next thing you're talking. You were the manifesto said imposing a set of graduated penalties for employers. You also quoted. I pulled out a quote from earlier this year when you were in opposition in March, when you said the Department of Immigration needed to be more proactive when it comes to investigating work permit violations and stronger fines.
Right.
You were talking $5,000 to $10,000 fine is nothing compared to what they get out of their employees. When you're talking about fines, when you're talking about being proactive, what are you going to do? What kind of fines would you be looking at?
Well, I think for some employers, fines are just considered to be, or can be considered to be, just the cost of doing business. So yeah, I've abused this permit policy for 6 months. I've gotten a couple $100,000 worth of work out of these people, so I'll pay a $10,000 fine. So that's not good enough. Employers who willfully violate immigration policy will face graduated penalties, including restrictions on the issuance of work permits.
And is that legislation or policy that you're going to introduce?
I'll take advice from my technical people about the best way to put in place, but that will be the objective. The policy or legislation, whichever one is most appropriate.
And what constitutes bad faith?
Contriving. I'll give an example. Bad faith would be when you put in an ad for a cleaner, and you say you need 2 years experience and all kinds of specialized knowledge about cleaning supplies to be a house cleaner, and then you submit a work permit application for someone who has none of those qualifications and expect to get the work permit.
Which is what you mentioned before, misleading adverts.
Right. That's bad faith.
What happens, just a thought off the top of my head, what happens if nobody still applies for the job?
If nobody still applies for the job, and it's a contrived ad?
No, if you change the ad, but there's still a vacancy arise, and that person can't fill that vacancy still, are they allowed to come back to you and say, can I change the ad, or how does it work?
Any ad submitted in good faith, we recognize that you need people to come to Bermuda to work. It's been like that since 1609. So that's not an issue. The issue is the explicit attempt to deny Bermudians a fair opportunity to get work in their own country. It has nothing to do with not wanting to have foreign workers in this country. We need to have greater diversity on every level in this country, and I fully embrace it. So I want to see when we bring in people a nice diverse range of people, but you cannot have policies that are intending to deny Bermudians opportunities.
My interviewees seem to have a habit of guessing my next question. Because
I try to be a little bit introspective and reflect on what I think you might be thinking about doing.
I can promise the viewers that we haven't colluded on this one iota. But I was going to ask, because it naturally leads on to a statement you made about the principles you want to see embraced when it comes to immigration. And one of the things you say is maintaining a framework that will, quotes, foster continued growth in the business sector using a friendly and accommodating approach.
Yeah.
Can you define friendly and accommodating?
Well, I think there's a generic understanding of what that means.
Well, what if I was a businessman and you were talking to me and I asked you that question, what would you say? I'd need some clarification.
Friendly would, from a business, as I said to the people I met with yesterday, it means my door is always open. We can talk about any issues. We may have differences in how an issue needs to be or should be addressed, but we'll talk about it in a respectful manner and try to arrive at the ideal solution. That's firstly. Secondly, and I'm just repeating myself, consultation is an inherent part of any decision-making process. And thirdly, policy and law should be based on sound information, research, evidence. It's not based on an anecdote or a view of what you think should be in place.
Are you going to be business friendly?
We are business friendly. That's why we've met with industry, We will continue to meet with industry, and all of us want to see the economy grow. All of us want to see prosperity in Bermuda. That prosperity needs to be spread out. It needs to be shared, and we will do what we have to do to try to get that in place. But you cannot do that if there is an increase in marginalization of the very people whose lives we're supposed to be benefiting through our policies and laws. So that's why I don't embrace the concept of just growing Bermuda. Growing Bermuda where people don't factor makes no sense to me. I don't believe in the abstract concept of growing Bermuda or the abstract concept of just business is great. Business has to be good for people. We govern to benefit people. We don't govern to benefit GDP growth. We govern to benefit the people.
There are some argue that GDP growth would benefit the people.
But well, some would argue that. But those who really want to look at GDP growth will also want to look at how that GDP growth is spread, because greater inequality has been the trend globally, and that's going to lead to discontent.
There's a theory that says to grow the economy you need more people.
Yeah, I've heard that theory.
Well, it's out there.
Of course, you tell me one economic theory predicated on economic growth coming from more people. The issue is that
more people will spend more money, I suppose, is the basic premise.
Yeah, but so what? So what? Based on that logic, you just bring in 20,000 people and the economy will grow? Of course not.
I'm not the economist.
Right, but no credible...
I wouldn't be sitting here if I was the economist.
But Jeremy...
But the issue is, the population has declined by several thousand people.
Has it? Over what time frame?
The resident population.
Over what time frame? How do you know that?
Well, the statistics show it.
Right, so if you look at the data, right, go on data, the only accurate count of people in this country is the census. So you look at the 1991, the 2000, and 2010 census, and you tell me what the residential population is. And I can tell you it has not changed to any significant degree from 2000 to 2010.
It's Bermudians.
The residential population. That's the issue. It's not Bermudians or anybody else.
So why are we told all the time that there's 4,000 people who have left the island?
That's a very good question.
So you don't think they have?
Oh, I think people left between 2008 and 2012. Of course they did. We lost 1,000 jobs at HSBC. Construction jobs, 1,000 construction jobs disappeared, right? So people have left. But the question is not that people have left. The question is, what is the trend? And what are the numbers over any 10-year period, which is the only accurate count of our residential population is the census. We had 12,000 work permits issued in 2008. We now have about 6,000. So clearly the numbers have dropped. That's not the issue. The issue is whether or not you have people who are fully gainfully employed. Mm-hmm. That's the first thing. About numbers, first of all, there is no economic theory that says you need more population to grow an economy. And no economist will ever argue that. But what is important is that you need to have certain economic activities that create the conditions for growth. And it could come from internal business development, local companies or international companies, or it could come from tourism. It's not that you need more people living here, you need more people spending money in Bermuda. Mm-hmm. And so if our numbers of tourism have dropped from 500,000 to 300,000, wouldn't you think that 200,000 additional tourists would have a significant economic impact? So those who argue exclusively for an increased residential population have an ulterior motive. If you're solely concerned with economic growth and spreading of wealth, then you would focus on more people in Bermuda spending money. And those people could be residents, they could be tourists. There is not a singular approach that needs to be adopted.
If the opportunity arose and to bring in 1,000 people, would you welcome that? Say if the construction boomed and you needed 1,000.
Of course. But it's the whole point. You don't posit that we need the numbers and we need to go out and find them. We need to grow the economy. There are some areas of economic growth that have no impact on the residential population. Tourism is one. The insurance-linked security business is another. That's a booming sector in international business. Mm-hmm. It has no impact on increasing the residential population whatsoever. You're going to talk to your friends in IB, they'll tell you the same thing. Okay, so we have to be fact-based in what we say. And if you have an ulterior motive about why you want more people to be in Bermuda, then it's going to come out if you can't give a sound economic rationale to your argument.
When you say ulterior motive, what do you think people with that argument want when you say ulterior motive?
I don't know what anyone who puts that argument forward today subscribe to, but I do know, because of my own research and my, in my former life as an academic, well, I'm still an academic of sorts, there was a long history of manipulating immigration policy for political purposes. It's well documented. And you can read it in my book, and it's just well documented. So when I hear people arguing for this increase in the residential population without any economic foundation to it whatsoever, I do have to question the motives, but I don't know what the motives are.
Fair enough. It's good to clarify all that. Now, there was, soon after you came into office, Patricia Gordon-Pamplin, and it says here, has taken aim at Walton Brown, accusing the new Home Affairs Minister of making a political decision in favour of an expat. And if I can read a quote, when speaking of fair, Mr Brown barely allowed the ink to dry on his appointment before making a political decision in favour of an expat who blatantly misrepresented facts on application forms, and the minister expected that a blind eye would be cast over such inconsistencies, she wrote in a statement. Now, not mentioned by name, but we seem to be referring to the Reverend Tweed. What's your reaction to that?
Well, it's humour, because the former minister knows very well that in the case of Reverend Tweed, she acted in ways that were inconsistent with her responsibility as a minister. It was very clear, it is very clear, that Minister Tweed does not require a work permit as the spouse of a Bermudian who is not legally separated. The law is very clear that he does not need a work permit. He had a work permit before, but with that information, which the former minister had on her desk for well over 1 month, that minister refused to act on that matter. She had no discretion. It was her duty to inform Reverend Tweed that he was able to work without a work permit. And so, yes, as a matter of urgency, a sense of justice, the ink was barely dried when I made that decision, because it was highly inappropriate for someone to have been denied natural justice for that period of time. There is another matter where the minister has also acted in ways that are inconsistent with her position as minister, and that matter will be resolved by tomorrow.
Which matter is
You'll
it?
find out in due course.
In the court case, the Chief Justice said that the matter regarding Reverend Tweed should be remitted to the Minister, quote, to be dealt with in accordance to with the law.
Exactly.
And he stated it would be, quote, desirable for the Minister to act on the advice of the Board of Immigration and allow the Board to make the substantive decision. Did the Board make that decision, or did you?
The Board makes recommendations.
Did the Board make a recommendation?
Yes, the Board did.
And what the recommendation was to?
My decision was consistent with the Board's recommendation.
And did the Board explain why they made that recommendation?
I explained to you why. I explained to you why just now.
But did the Board make a recommendation as well on why? Did they explain why? Did the Board itself explain why?
The Board didn't have to explain why. It's very clear in law.
Okay.
That he did not need a work permit. It's like me asking, well, never, I won't. It's very clear in law. What's there? There's no discretion.
Fair enough. It's just good to clear that up and get a different point of view, because it wasn't really explained in the original articles that were there. Talking about the Chief Justice as well, he also called, in a slightly different case, for a narrow and focused fine-tuning of Bermuda's work permit policy in the light of this, the argument between the AME Church and the Bermuda government. He said it illustrated the folly of the apparently long-standing tradition of ministers retaining legal power to substantively decide individual work permit application.
Sorry, what?
Sorry, I'll read that again. Sorry. It illustrated the folly of the apparently long-standing tradition of ministers retaining legal power to substantively decide individual work permit applications. Do you agree with that? Do you think that changes need to be made?
We are in the process of changing the entire work permit policy. I don't recall that, so I have to look at that comment by the Chief Justice.
It's a direct quote.
It's a direct quote, and I accept that it is, which is interesting, because My understanding, I'm not a lawyer, but my understanding is that judges comment on law and not policy. But if he wants to venture into the area of policy,
I guess we're allowed to make a recommendation or a comment.
Yeah, well,
is that something you think you look at with work permit?
well, I have a lot of respect
review?
for Dr. Cayley, so obviously I'm going to look at any recommendation that the Chief Justice puts forward.
Do you think those changes personally need to be changed? Do they need to be made, just on a personal point of view? You know, looking back over the Reverend Tweed issue, which maybe could have all been avoided if the minister hadn't had control.
No, I think there are aspects of the system that work very well now, because there is an element where ministerial discretion has been removed. That's why you have the Immigration Appeals Tribunal, because it was recognized that certain appeals should not be dealt with by the once the minister makes a decision or recommendation, you can appeal whatever the minister does. You can go to the Immigration Appeals Tribunal. It used to be cabinet, which made no sense. So there is an independent body, the IAT, which has that responsibility for a certain number or types of appeals, which is fine.
Moving on from immigration, we had a good look at that.
We have.
One of the departments that comes under your remit is Consumer Affairs. And again, from March this year, there was a statement I think you made in the House where you talked about price gouging. And the quote is, I'm hoping this is accurate, the banks have licensed to levy any fee they see fit on its customers, and the pricing mechanisms are increasingly offensive, he said. Quotes, let's go after the big boys.
Yes.
Are you going to go after the big boys? How and why?
Why? Well, the why is obvious. The price gouge.
Alleged. I mean, have you got evidence of that?
Well, I mean, I'll give an example. How is it that you can have a bank account which has no overdraft facility, yet the bank, through their monthly charges, put you in overdraft and then charge you an overdraft fee? That's gouging. That's inappropriate. That's one example.
Okay.
Second,
Yep.
they've introduced a series of fees for online banking that didn't exist before. In many progressive countries, those kinds of practices have long since been dealt with, and given that the we will deal with it. Given that other entities have not dealt with it, we will deal with it.
How will you deal with it?
Legislation.
To outlaw these charges?
We will look at what is the practice in many other jurisdictions regarding such measures, and we will Bermudianize that legislation to ensure that the consumer is not faced with price gouging by entities that just have the ability to put in whatever fees they want to.
So have you already instructed Consumer Affairs to do this, or is that something that's in the pipeline?
That's already on the radar for Consumer Affairs. And alongside that is the question of the, what are they called? The debt collection agencies, who in some cases have charged as much as 70% interest on people's debt. So you're already in trouble because you don't have the money to pay. And then you're charging 70% interest on debt, which is just offensive on any level. So we're going to regulate. There's no legislation regulating the debt collection agencies,
okay.
right? So we're going to introduce legislation to regulate them.
You're going to get a lot of kickback from the banks, aren't you, on this? Are you prepared for that?
Why?
I imagine you'll be facing a lot of lobbying. Well, they're going to lose revenue.
Well, banks have ways to make money in many other areas. They should not be making a nickel and dime off the backs of the consumer. It is part of a growing practice worldwide to address it, and we will fall in step with global practices.
I don't know. Is there an issue where they might be persuaded to move more people offshore to save money if this is the case?
Right. Well, they've done a pretty good job of that already,
Yeah,
haven't they?
and
Right.
they have, and big potential to do a lot more.
Right. So we should succumb to what, intimidation? Or should we do what's right for the people?
Well, I wouldn't suggest this to come to intimidation, but there is an issue where you might lose jobs. That's a balance you've got to strike somehow.
Right, it's always a balance, but we cannot allow people, we cannot allow powerful organizations to price gouge. It is just inappropriate, and we will fix it.
Are we likely to see anything about this in the throne speech, or will that be later on, do you think?
You really want to know what's in the throne
I
speech?
do, yeah. I always want to know what's in the throne speech in advance.
2 weeks.
I mean, I'm curious, I'm inquisitive.
You'll be okay. You'll find out soon enough.
One of your bugbears, many bugbears, I guess, was the issue of passports.
Yes.
And you said we must exert greater control. The UK does not have our best interests at heart. We need to get back control of our passports. I'd urge the government to address this issue with a level of urgency.
Yeah.
Don't be intimidated by the British. I hope I'm not intimidating you.
Are you British?
Are you going to pursue this?
It's already in train.
How?
We are identifying the software or the processes that are needed to return the issuance of passports to Bermuda. We know that we will have a fight with the British, but that is a matter of priority for this government, and I look forward to having that discussion.
Just remind me, why did the British take it away?
The publicly stated reason is they wanted to have better security control over the issuance of passports. And that's a bogus argument, because we've never lost a passport.
What was the private statement, private conversation?
That's a much longer involved discussion involving the UK, its overseas territories, the United Nations, and a variety of other issues. But we don't have time to get into that. But it involves attempting to convince entities that there is one singular British people.
Right.
Because I suspect, as I predicted 15 years ago, they were going to take control of our passports. They're going to get rid of our passports eventually. That's the British approach. But we're going to wrestle control away from them.
It's going to be a tough fight if they've taken it back already. Have you
we weren't elected to have tea. We were elected to fight for principles and a more just society.
Which, have you, reminded me, talking about tea, have you spoken to the governor about this yet? Presumably it's an issue for him, is it?
But
Is it direct with the FCO?
There are those who believe that it's imperative to have conversations with the governor about important matters. I'm not one of those who embraces that. The governor represents the UK government here, so I guess on some matters one needs to talk to him, but the power lies with the FCO.
So you'll bypass the governor and go, is it a question of bypassing the governor, or is it a question of protocol, you can go straight to the FCA?
I'm new to this job, so I don't know what protocol is. I'll find out.
We will find out, I'm sure we'll hear.
Yes.
There's a couple of issues there's one issue still that's due to come up in the House. I don't know exactly when, and that's the question of Wayne Furbert reintroducing his amendments to the same-sex marriage. Now, you voted against this originally. Will you vote against it again?
What do you think?
I'm asking you.
I'll change my mind in a couple of months, of course.
Well, but it's in the party manifesto.
What's in the party manifesto?
That you won't allow marriage between a man and a man, and a woman and a woman.
That is not correct.
No, what was
that
it?
That is not correct. The party platform says that we will ensure that same-sex couples have the same legal benefits as heterosexual couples, save for marriage.
Save for marriage, yeah.
So we haven't taken a position as a party on same-sex marriage. It's a conscience vote. And
it will be a conscience vote? I was going to ask that, will there be a whip?
It was a conscience vote the first time it was dealt with.
But as there's reference to it this time in the manifesto, in your own platform, will it still be a conscience vote?
The issue
you expect it to be a conscience vote? You can't decide, obviously.
The manifesto says it's a conscience vote.
Okay.
It remains a conscience vote. And so right now, same-sex marriages are legally permissible. If there comes a time when same-sex marriages are no longer permissible, then the PLP government will introduce legislation which will give same-sex couples the same legal benefits as heterosexual couples, save for marriage.
So those who are already married, if Wayne Furbert's legislation is successful, will be given equal rights, will be given the rights by the PLP government?
Anyone who's legally married now will remain legally married, and all the rights.
And they'll have the rights?
Of course. Anyone.
Because there was an issue before that if Mr. Furbert's legislation went through, that couples who got married wouldn't actually be able to get a divorce. They'd have to have another amendment to legislation to allow them to do that.
Well, what I can say is that once you've given rights to people along those lines, you're not going to be able to pass laws to reverse those rights.
Final question. You'll have to speak, obviously, on a personal level on this one, I think.
So you're asking a minister minister to speak on a personal level on a matter. Okay, let's try the question.
Let's try the question. Let's see how it works.
Yes.
You are very pro-independence. Is that something you still want to pursue? Is that something that you'll pursue within Cabinet and within the PLP government still?
So, that's been a matter for me publicly since the 1980s. So you somehow think that I've changed in the last 30 years?
But now you're in government.
My views remain the same. My views don't change because I now sit in Cabinet. I'm still a very strong supporter of Bermuda becoming a self-governing place in all manifestations, and we need it.
On that note, Mr. Brown, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Cheers.